First of all, thank you everyone for joining us for today for a very fun and exciting session of strategic planning holiday edition. So just to start us off, I'm Lindsay. I'm one of the sales leaders here at Profit. And for those that don't know us, we're a strategy execution platform, and we're working with local governments to measure, track, and share their strategic plans. We've also got Jolly St. Nick here with us today from Sustainovation. He's going to be walking through some of those more tactile and actual insights on how to accomplish and set a strategic plan. Nick, you want to give us a little bit insight about yourself and Sustainovation?
Absolutely. Thanks, Lindsay. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for the gift of your time and presence. I intend to be over the top with my holiday analogies today, so I'm really excited to have you all joining for this session. My role as CEO of Sustainovation, I'm the author of the book by the same name. I spent 15 years working in local governments, and I help folks understand what it means to truly innovate and sustain that innovation in local government. So for me, this is a personal space that I really enjoy working with. I work almost exclusively with local governments because this is the space that I care about most, and I want this to be a really practical guide. I've done over 36 different strategic planning efforts with organizations across the country, and I want to share with you all some of the things I've learned along the way, and hopefully make today not just this really high-level discussion, but a really practical level of implementation and how we actually create a meaningful strategic plan. So really excited to be able to partner with Profit on this because they have a piece of this that I know that a lot of my local governments are looking for. And that's really exciting to me, is to have that opportunity to be able to partner with them to talk about how do we actually measure our success as we go through this. So this is a really great opportunity for us to partner up here. And obviously Lindsay's bringing the Santa vibes. I'm bringing the ugly sweater vibes. So we're starting off on the right note there. Lindsay, any other thoughts before I kick it off?
Yes, no, thank you for that, Nick. But a couple quick housekeeping items before we get started. So the first is you will all receive a link to the recording following this session. But we also would encourage this to be interactive. Please use the chat or the Q&A function to ask any questions you may have. We'll make sure we get to those by the end of the session, or if there's any we can't answer in the session, we'll be sure to follow up with you. So feel free to use those channels. And yeah, that's it. We can go ahead and dive on into it.
Well, let's do it. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. Really excited to have you here. Let's talk about what the keys to strategic planning look like. So just fair warning here, I used AI to generate some images for us. So if you see something that makes no sense whatsoever, laugh at it. It's totally fine. I'm just trying to go ahead and bring that spirit to the equation. So if you find something funny, leave it in the chat, point it out to others. You won't bother me or humiliate me at all. But let's talk about what it takes to actually build a strong strategic plan, because there's things that we need in order to be successful. So I want to walk through a couple of these things that are elements of a strategic plan that help us in that space. One of those things is understanding the context. So many of our organizations have mission, vision, and values. Many of us at least have a mission or a vision. Some of us have values, but understanding all three of those is a really important part. And they all serve a different function in terms of creating that strategic plan. That vision is kind of where we want to go. The mission is what it is we do, and the values are how we get there. So that's part of what we're after too, is understanding what's a strong value. Values, what I like about values, just real quick, is that values create a roadmap for our employees in an organization when there is no direct boss. So if our employees need to make a decision in the field, they can make a decision based on the values of the organization, and we know that they're doing the right things. So each one of these has a real importance to us in terms of understanding where we're trying to go, which is what a strategic plan is all about. Establishing the strategies and actions. Now, this is predominantly what we're going to focus on today, is the items in orange, the key focus area, the strategic objectives. And if we have time during a strategic planning process, we want to get into the initiatives if we can, as well as getting into some of the measures. Now, the measures aren't necessarily as important, but the key focus areas and the strategic objectives are critically important, and making sure that we have those, especially when we're working in tandem with council, is really important. Personally, I like to make sure that in any room, I've got the council members as well as the staff members, the senior staff members in the room. That way we're all singing the same tune, we're all understanding where each other's coming from, and we have some transparency in how we're making the decisions that we're making. So we're going to focus predominantly on those orange areas today, because that is the backbone and the crux of our strategic plan. That is the strong tree that we are going to have as our Christmas tree, that fir that we cut down in the forest and start decorating, friends. Then we talk about the resource allocation and timelines. Now, these are important to strategic planning. However, they typically have their own processes. So when it comes to funding, that's typically the budget process that we go through. So we're not trying to do that in our strategic planning directly in the room, as well as staffing. And there's lots of different ways that communities handle staffing. So sometimes that goes through the budget process. Sometimes there's an HR-led process where we look at the reviews of how that's happening. But again, that is typically outside the direct strategic planning process. It is, however, an important part to a strong strategic plan. Then, of course, we get into the implementation. How are we doing? Are we making it happen here? So we've got to collect that data on performance and implement these actual initiatives. So once we know what we're trying to do, how are we doing? Are we collecting our data? Do we know that we're doing well or not meeting the metrics on that? Those are the things that we've really got to get into in order to know whether we're achieving what we want to achieve. And then, of course, assessing that progress. Do we see the impact that we're hoping to see? Are we being effective in how we're going about that? And what efficiencies can we create as we go through that progress itself? So these can include things like surveys, data analysis, evaluations, et cetera. And then, of course, sharing those results, accountability. We've got to be able to inform the public. Now, we talk a lot about transparency in local government. I think it's a fine term. I would argue that what we're actually after is clarity, because clarity is different than transparency. Clarity is allowing people to understand what's actually happening. And that's very different sometimes than transparency. We can put all the numbers out there, but if people don't know how to read or interpret those numbers, it really doesn't do us a lot of good. What's great about 4, 5, and 6 on this list is these are things that Profit can actually help you with directly, which is why this is such a great partnership. So that's an exciting thing to me, is they can help you track and roll up these measurements so you know that you're being successful in the implementation of your strategic plan. So these are the elements of a strong strategic plan, and I just wanted to lay that out as a baseline. By the way, I lay this out as a baseline in every strategic planning session I do, because once we understand this, we have the right framework to keep building on. But we got our house. We're going to decorate our house. Maybe many of you have probably dug out those Christmas lights, which I'm sure were in a tangled up ball stuffed somewhere in a box, buried in your basement or buried in a storage shed somewhere. But that's the truth too, is we got to hang those lights. But in order to hang the holiday lights and create this beautiful home with a well-decorated Christmas theme, the challenge becomes that we've got to untangle the lights. And lots of us have different ways of doing that. So I want to make sure that we've got the right themes as we go through this, which means that we need to review with everybody involved in the process key level setting information. Things like survey data, also something Profit can help with. Roles and responsibilities, whose role and whose responsibility is it for different sections of the strategic plan? We define the purpose of the process that we're going to go through, how it will work, and also what we are not doing. And both of those are critically important, what we are doing as well as what we're not doing. And creating those baselines allows us to have really good conversations, but especially when we're dealing with both staff as well as council members or commissioners in the room at the same time, we definitely need to level set expectations in terms of how that works. So what does it look like? Here's what we are doing. Here's what we are doing today. Today, we are talking about, and again, this is an example of what I use in the real world. We're defining our focus areas. What are the key focus areas? So in this case, we're talking about a keyword or a phrase. This is really simple. We don't want to get too complicated with this. We want to keep it simple. But we're going to define the key focus areas. After that, we're going to get into defining strategic objectives under each key focus area. So again, what types of lights are we hanging up? Are we doing other ornamentation? Are we putting other things outside the house to decorate it? What are we doing here? But we need to know exactly what it is so we have a strategy before we're hanging our lights up. That means we know what our key focus areas are. We know what our strategic objectives look like. A good strategic objective has a verb as well as a descriptor. So that includes things like enhance, there's our verb. What type of effort? A recruitment effort. Or deliver, that's our verb. What type of public service? Exceptional public service. So we use descriptors to help dig down a little bit more into what we mean by our key focus area. What we are not doing. So in this case, I'm assuming the group that I'm working with already has defined mission, vision, and values. So we're not going to reinvent the wheel when it comes to that. What we're doing is saying that these are already established, and I would, in most circumstances, put those up there and discuss those with a group. This is our mission, this is our vision, these are our values, so that that's set in stone, and we also know, everybody in the room knows what that looks like. We define the budget, and the staffing comes through the budget process so that people aren't worried about how are we going to fund this today, or what staffing are we going to dedicate to this. That's not the in-the-room discussion we want to be having. And then defining the measurements and KPIs. Again, if we have a really robust long-term process that we're using for strategic planning, and I'm talking 3 to 4 days, we can get down to that level. Predominantly, what we're looking at is a 1 or a 2 day workshop, in which case we only have time for those key focus areas and strategic objectives, maybe those initiatives. But when we get into measurements and KPIs, key performance indicators, that's something the departments should be responsible for coming back and saying, here's what we're going to measure and here's how we know we're successful. So again, we level set with some definitions. Key focus area. These are the words or phrases around which we build. Strategic objectives. These are the ways that we know we're succeeding in our key focus areas. We're only looking for 20 to 30 objectives total. So we don't want to get too crazy with this. So not too crazy with this, right? And we have to make sure that everybody's job is reflected in our strategic objectives. If one of our employees can't find themselves in a strategic objective, we've missed the mark, because that says that plan is not for everyone. And then initiatives and projects, if we can get down to this level, these are the means by which we'll accomplish our strategic objectives. And then those KPIs, those measurements, are how we know we are successful when we do that. So that's the other piece of this. How do we know that we're actually going to be successful as we go about this? The other term I really like to introduce here is consensus versus consent. And this is critically important, especially in my opinion, in dealing with the public, as well as dealing with our commissioners or our council members. We've got to make sure that they understand these terms. We are not, friends, we are not after consensus. Consensus means agreement, and it's virtually impossible to get today. We all have different opinions about what type of holiday lights we like. Do you like the clear ones? Do you like the color ones? Do you like the big bulbs? Do you like the small bulbs? Whatever it is, we got to have different styles, and we all have different approaches. So what we're actually after is something called consent, which means no significant objection. You see, consensus is going to lead us to wordsmithing and spending a lot of time on what I call minute details. Whereas consent is about, you know what, I don't have a significant objection. I don't love it exactly as it is, but I don't have a significant objection. That allows us to coalesce around topics and move a heck of a lot faster. So also something I do in the level setting of expectations. And of course, we make sure that we list out those mission, vision, and values and do that level setting as well. And last but not least, I like to lead into the first section of it with reviewing any input or survey results we had. As I mentioned, Profit is able to go ahead and help you do survey tools, internal, external, but I love community surveys. If we have community surveys and we've got that data available to us, I like taking the time to review those results, synthesize open-ended comments through AI. So I'll take any open-ended commentary, and I've had organizations with 800 pages of comments from the public. You and I both know they're not doing anything with those because it's 800 pages of comments. So what we can do is we can take AI and use it to go through that and help to synthesize key themes around which the public may have concerns. Employee surveys give us the same kinds of insights as well as council surveys. What kind of open-ended questions can we ask our council members? What's your vision for the community? What does success look like in 2030 to you? What would the headline of the newspaper be 50 years from now? What would you most like to be remembered for? Using those open-ended questions, we can also use that to synthesize around key themes that we can generate key focus areas out of. So survey results are a really important part of level setting. And remember, if you're doing this with your community, all you're doing is holding up the mirror and saying, here's what folks said. You're not here to necessarily offer opinions. You're here to just help them see what others are saying. Focus groups are a great way to go about it, and roundtable discussions are as well. So I really like those as tools and techniques in order to gain valuable stakeholder input before we get into the strategic planning process in the room itself. Trimming the tree. That's right, we got our house decorated. Now how about that beautiful tree? So what are we going to do? We've got to identify those key focus areas. So it's like placing the ornaments on the tree. Where and what are we looking to place on our tree? So we want that cohesive look and feel. And again, we want to make sure that people can find themselves in this plan and these key focus and priorities. So how do we identify the key focus areas? As I said, I take open-ended community input, employee input, council member input. And in this case, this is an actual example from a community that I was working with. And you can see here that they had a variety of different key themes that came out: public safety, economic development, infrastructure development. Now we can take these key themes and say, okay, which of these 12 themes listed here resonates with you most? Why? We can hold some facilitated discussion. Which out of those themes wasn't there? What needs to be added to this list for consideration? And then we can begin the process of narrowing down and understanding thoughts and feelings. So in this case, You might ask your council members, you might ask your commissioners to use voting stickers. They're just little round dots, voting stars, if you want to be holiday themed about it, whatever you're using in the room. But we want them to go ahead and put that up there to narrow our focus so we can see which of these themes resonates most. Then we've got some areas where we can consolidate and build into key focus areas. So we want to limit our focus areas, but be inclusive of concepts. So we might take two and marry them up together. Maybe it's economic development and infrastructure becomes combined. Well, that becomes the key focus area. Maybe it's just economic development. So whatever we decide, we start to narrow and coalesce around a couple of key themes. Again, we're not looking for too many. 4 to 8 key focus areas is what I tend to prefer going through a process like this. If we get into 10, we're missing the boat. So we want to go ahead and make sure that we're starting to narrow that down. And again, remember, consent means no significant objection. So if it's not exactly what you were hoping for, hopefully you can get people and continue them moving through the process themselves. Then it's making that gingerbread house. We got our house decorated. We got our tree decorated. It's all looking beautiful, friends. I got to say, you are masters of class and craft. Now we got to make that gingerbread house. And who doesn't love making a gingerbread house? With each of these, what we have to do is have that strong structure so that our house will stand up. We got to bake with the right ingredients, which means now that we have our key focus areas, what are the strategic objectives that we're going to use to build this beautiful strategic gingerbread house that we're creating? And remember, everybody's house is different. What works for one community doesn't always work for the next community. That's why this is part art as well as part science. They're the things I laid out at the beginning. These are the key focus areas. These are the things we're going to focus on. These are the key elements of a good strategic plan. That's fine. But every community I've dealt with has got different elements of things that are maybe the third rail for the public, and they don't want to deal with that. That's something they can't touch, or the structure needs to be radically different because they don't like the terminology. There's always something different when it comes to decorating your gingerbread house, and every community is different when it comes to this. But we're still looking for the strategic objectives that inform our key focus areas. So how do we build a good strategic objective? This is what it looks like to me. So again, having an action verb and a descriptive term are critically important to know what that good objective looks like. And so we do some practice in the room. So you can see here a couple actual examples. Build what type of economy? A resilient economy. Invest in and maintain, two verbs, important or critical assets. Develop affordable housing options. And you can see here we've got that verb and we've got that descriptor that allows us to be a little more robust about the description, again, of that strategic objective, which is going to help us accomplish that key focus area. So here's what we get into in developing those strategic objectives. Brainstorm on them. Now we've got these key focus areas. What are the things that drive our success in these areas? What are the top 3 to 7 that will create the greatest impact? So remember, we have 4 to 8 key focus areas. Now we're developing 3 to 7 strategic objectives under those 4 to 8 key focus areas. So this is how I like to do it in the room. Typically, I spend about 15 to 20 minutes brainstorming on strategic objectives. I mix up council or commissioners and staff and senior staff so that we have a good mix going on, and ask them to tackle specific areas, those key focus areas, and build objectives around that. Typically, after 15 to 20 minutes, we've kind of hit our limit in terms of sort of generating those things. And now we go and report out for 5 minutes. We take time to go ahead and add anything in from somebody else who's got a really strong opinion about things that need to be added in. And then we go through and evaluate which of these are most critical to our success. So for me, that's voting stickers again. Get up here and have 5 stickers and go vote on which of these is the biggest priority. Some communities like to differentiate between staff votes and council or commissioner votes, so we use different color stickers for those. Some don't care, so we can use whatever sticker color we want. But our goal here is to develop the master list of those things that are those top 3 to 7 strategic objectives under each key focus area. So again, those 3 preference stickers right there, you can identify those most important objectives. And again, I like the timeline and the horizon of 5 years for us thinking along this 5-year horizon. I think when we get beyond that, it's valuable for comprehensive plans. Don't get me wrong. The 50-year comprehensive plan, the 2050 or the 2040 comprehensive plan, that's fine. But we also recognize that in the real world, strategic priorities shift, elections happen, senior staff members leave. And so when we start to look at this 20-year horizon, you can really get yourself out over your skis if you're not careful about this. You might drink a little too much eggnog, might be a different way of looking at it, okay? And again, goal is consent, not consensus. But we're trying to have some discussion and make sure that people are building in that buy-in as we go through. If we have any significant objections to an area, we table it and set it aside so that the larger progress doesn't get lost in the equation. We can come back to it later, but in this case, I just want to make sure that we're moving forward and continuing to develop what we need to. And then we identify the key initiatives and projects. Now, mind you, the process that we're talking about here just occurred over a day to a day and a half. So that was a lot of work that just went into what was very small in terms of the slides, but there's a lot of facilitation and discussion in the room that help us be successful when we build these out. So what are the key initiatives or projects that move that strategic objective forward? It's pretty easy. We prioritize those initiatives using voting stickers again. So really easy to kind of get that synthesis. And we're identifying the tops of what that looks like. So again, here is an actual real world example of a client of mine, a customer that I've worked with. Their key focus area was economic development and revitalization. You can see here the strategic objectives that were crafted. That first one, pursue new economic development and zoning tools to revitalize declining areas. So you can see much more specific on how they intend to go after economic development and revitalization. You'll notice they have 3 strategic objectives under this key focus area. In some of theirs, they had 7 or 8. In this one, they had 3. Explore new tools or grant programs with property owners to adapt buildings to the needs of the modern. So you can see here that we're getting really specific about the initiative that we're going to engage in order to do this. And you see here, implement the retail facade improvement program. They had a program in place. So that is an initiative or a project that they have ready to go. And now we have it aligned in the proper part of the plan. So you can see here that we've got the elements that we're after. We have that key focus area. We have 3 in this case, strategic objectives, and we have initiatives and projects listed underneath. So we've really done a great job baking this beautiful gingerbread house. Just don't let the kids too close to it or the dog near it because they might knock it off the table and eat the whole thing. So with that said, moving right along, holiday star picks. We know that for that tree to be decorated beautifully, the question is, what is the star you're going to put on top of that tree? What is the top of the tree look like? And in this case, the metaphor I'm after here is priorities. What are your actual priorities? You've listed all this out. You have your key focus area. You have your strategic objectives. The question is, which of these, when stacked up against each other, becomes most important to you? This is some of the most difficult, crucial, and difficult is probably the key word, difficult work that we can do is this space right here. So we're looking to force rank priorities against each other. This is how I do it. Now there's different techniques that you can use, but this is how I do it. So again, Profit has a survey tool built into their software. I've used SurveyMonkey in the past. You can use voting stickers if that's what it needs to be. But I like forced prioritization because it forces us to grapple with things having different levels of priority, even though it's all in the strategic plan. So forced prioritization to identify those top priorities. The survey that I like to use basically goes after 2 distinct things. One is to assign, what I ask people to do is assign 100 points based on which key focus area is the most important to achieving the vision of the community. So we have that vision statement, we have these key focus areas. Which of these is most important to achieving the vision of the community? Now, I prefer to have council members or commissioners only assign points in this area. And again, we've got 4 to 8 of these, so they'll assign their points. It must total to 100. So they might go 25, 25, 25, 25, or they might decide one is 50, one's 20, one's 20, one's 10. However they want to stack up their points. Then I ask all members, staff members, as well as council members or commissioners, to assign 100 points based on which strategic objective is the most important or impactful to achieving that key focus area. So the idea here is we're going down one more layer. Now, if we do the math on this, there's math involved in this, good times, holiday fun, who doesn't love a little math? We do a little math on this, and what we end up with is a forced prioritization and a forced ranking of every strategic objective stacked up against each other. So now we can see what our true priorities look like. Now, this is fascinating, and sometimes it ruffles some feathers. Just like your drunkle, your drunk uncle who shows up, gets a little too much whiskey in him or whatever, and decides to blurt out what he's really thinking. It can be an uncomfortable process, but there's a lot of truth inside of it, friends. So if you can't use a survey, use voting stickers. This is an actual example of what that looks like. So this totals to 100 points on the right-hand side of the screen. But you'll see in this case, housing, and again, these words have been truncated to kind of fit in here, but this is an example. Housing is rated 8.9 out of 100, whereas community broadband, the bottom of the list, has a rating of 2.1, which means that housing, and in this case, affordable or attainable housing is really what we're after here, affordable or attainable housing, is more than 4 times more important to this community than community broadband is, even though they're both listed on the strategic plan. So what this does is it gives us real visibility into our priorities. Now the discussion that ensues is informed with the folks in the room, and we get to go ahead and talk about, wait a second, is that really what you mean? Do you think downtown revitalization is a 6.1, but you think water conservation is a 4.1? Does that make actual sense? Or is that just what the math told us? So this is a really great way for us to understand this. The value of this is that staff knows when there are two competing interests, affordable housing projects that they can work on versus community broadband, there is greater value to the organization in achieving its outcomes by doing work on housing than on community broadband. So it allows us to create alignment amongst staff in terms of what these priorities actually look like when it comes to the rubber meeting the road. And we got to wrap those gifts. If you're anything like me, you're terrible at wrapping gifts. So I like a good bag that you can stuff stuff in, and then I can tie the handle up. But at the same time, I have a sister of mine who's an absolute gift when it comes to gift wrapping, and she loves wrapping gifts. So I'm grateful whenever I get to see Brittany because she is happy to take my gifts and do what she needs to do with them. I love that. But we got to make this plan palatable and marketable. You know, those words on a page are fine, and they say our intent, which is great. But how is it that we're going to help people visualize what we're after? How can we make a compelling and marketable strategic plan? So we got to wrap that gift up and make it ready for presentation and celebration. So this is maybe the process that happens after the room. We're going to clean up and finalize any wording that we need to. We're going to make that plan prettier. We're going to make it compelling. We're going to visualize it. We eat with our eyes, friends. That gift that's sitting there under the tree, if it looks beautiful, people are excited for it. If it looks like the one I wrapped, they're like, what is this thing wrapped in butcher block paper? Doesn't matter how good it is if it's wrapped in butcher block paper. We got to have that visual appeal to it. And then we have to go back for that final adoption. We want one more shot for our elected officials to weigh in on it, to make sure that we've got an approved strategic plan. So we're going to wrap that gift up and bring it back to our people. And then at the end of the day, it's time to get to work, friends. These elves don't stop just because the gifts got delivered. It's time 364 days till the next Christmas. My little elves got to get to work. So we got to get our elves busy for the next year. What does that mean? We got to track our results and report on our progress. And again, how are we doing that? We need tools that allow us to report on what that looks like. And again, this is where Profit is such a great partner in this part of the equation, which is they can help you stay on task and on target, and their system rolls it up for you. So it really is an excellent tool to see that roll up so that you can keep an eye on that plan and make sure that that is being communicated effectively, not only to our elected leadership, but to the public as well. And with that said, enjoy your plan. We all know that the holidays are more fun with family and friends. So it's a good time to sit down and make sure that you're talking to people about what's in your strategic plan. As a community, go out, roll out the plan. Have your commissioners and your council members help. Talk about what's going on with the plan in the community. Make sure folks know where to access it, but really roll that out and share your plans, because sharing with family and friends is the key to a great holiday together. So with that said, we want to take a moment here and open it up to any of your questions. I'm happy to be as specific and answer any questions that you've got. That is our holiday gift to you. I hope you found it wrapped up nice, and I hope you enjoyed maybe a little bit of this, but love to hear what your questions might be with strategic planning and how we might be able to help.
Thank you for that, Nick. Yeah, we do actually have a couple of questions already, but if you have questions, again, feel free to use the Q&A piece just below to ask any questions there. But Nick, first question is, what mistakes do you see people making with strategic planning efforts?
You know, that's a great question. You know, there's definitely a couple of pitfalls I see people fall into on the regular. One is that they're not clear at the very beginning about what roles and responsibilities are in the room. So the what we're doing and the what we're not doing is really important. And it becomes that they get wrapped around the axle on something, and you impede your progress there. The other is not explaining the difference between consensus and consent.
Mhm.
And that becomes a really critical sticking point because we like the term consensus, and politicians in general love the term consensus. We're building consensus, which is great, except for when it comes to this, if everybody's got to agree on everything, we know that that's virtually impossible anymore for just about any topic. So if that becomes the mark that we're after, we're going to go a heck of a lot slower. So no significant objection is one of those things. But defining the role of council versus the role of staff in this is really important so that we have really clear delineations in that process. And then the other thing I'd say that's a real big pitfall is not using available data already. So the survey data that you have, and using that to establish baselines, employee survey data, community survey data, focus groups to inform the process at the outset. Um, it helps create that baseline and some of those rules that, especially when you're facilitating in the room, it's like, remember, this is what we talked about early. So it becomes important for level setting those expectations. But those are some of the things I see people struggle with right out of the gate.
Yeah, and I think some of that goes into our second question, which is more about that change management piece, right? And this is referred to organizations that are more resistant to change, right? How do we introduce this concept of strategic planning to some of the more resistant organizations or people who might not be on board?
Yeah, change management's definitely one of my favorite topics. I get into it all the time with the innovation space. This is similar when it comes to strategic planning. So when it comes to change management, there's a couple things that we have to do. One is we have to establish urgency. And if you can't do that, then you're not going to get people on board. So whether it's innovation or strategic planning, if you cannot establish why this is so critically important to do and why it is important for us to do it right now, you will not get people on board with whatever your change initiative is, period. The other thing is that we have to create a vision of what this looks like together, and then we have to share that vision. So that's what we're trying to do in the room is create the vision together and then share that vision with each other, and then hopefully share it outside of that. We need to enable others to act on that vision as well. So can we empower members of our community? Can we empower our staff member to be a part of the development of this? And then we need to make sure that we're getting wins, building momentum and getting the wins. The small wins lead to bigger wins. And then we use that to go ahead and continue to kind of sweep in this sort of change. So I like that as sort of a beginning framework, which is establish the urgency as step one. And that's where we have to go ahead and do it. With strategic planning, it's how do we know that we're doing what's in the best interests of the community? And how do we know that we're being efficient with the resources that we're being asked to steward? And those are some of the kinds of things that we want to be thinking about. If you're whoever it is you're dealing with, if you're elected leaders or your appointed leaders don't see the value in that, they will. It'll just come with a ton of bricks landing right on top of them at some point. I promise you, the public will find a way to go ahead and let you know their dissatisfaction at some point. And if you don't have a strategic plan to point towards, you are really in a difficult situation. And I've been brought into several communities after they've taken the black eye. And once you take the black eye, it is really hard to get back on the good side of the public. So we got to recognize this is a trust building opportunity. It's about proper stewardship of our resources. And it's pretty much in just about every single effective leadership book you will ever find, which is begin with the end in mind. What is it we're trying to accomplish? So it's a great question. By the way, I just want to tag on to that. If you'd like to know whether somebody is good with change or can be good with change, there's a question you can ask to find out. And it's a really fun one. I like to ask it in large rooms of people, but the question is, do you like going on vacation? And if a
Mhm.
person raises their hand, yes, I like going on vacation, that means that on some level, they're okay with change. If somebody doesn't raise their hand to that, they're not going to be good with change. But if they raise their
Sure.
hand, the only question becomes, how much change are they good with? And then we can help them become more comfortable with different types of change. Because when you go on vacation, you're traveling, there's the uncertainty of the location that you've never been to before, what might happen with the rooms, what's going to happen on an adventure, all of those little things that happen on a vacation that fall into the category of change that you have to deal with. That is, even though it's positive change, if somebody answers no to that question, that means you're probably never going to get them comfortable with change. If they answer yes, it means it's only how much change they're comfortable with, and we can bring them along on that journey. So if you're looking for a hack to find out whether somebody is actually totally resistant to change, try that one out, and it gives you a little insight into who you're dealing with there.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm gonna have to keep that in my back pocket for sure. Okay, we've got a couple more, and they're great questions. This one's fantastic. How do you track year-to-year progress? Our strategic plan is a 3-year plan, but revisited each year.
Great. Well, I'm gonna just throw it at Profit here for a second and say, Lindsay, talk to us about how do you help folks track progress year over year?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm happy to take it. So, Melanie, I'm gonna use your name. Sorry, Melanie, we get this question a lot, in the government space and in other spaces as well, right? Because organizations as a whole are looking into the future, right? We have plans, but they're not just for this quarter. They're not for just this year. Ideally, you want to be looking out 3, 5, even 10 years ahead and start aligning your goals and plan with this long-term vision. And so how do we track that at a higher level can be really difficult. And a lot of the organizations that Profit has worked with have tried this with tools like Excel and trying to manually track, how are we doing? Are the goals that we're putting in place, are they still aligned with our long-term strategy? And while that's possible, right, that's definitely an option. It's pretty manual, and it can take a lot of work. So the Profit platform allows you to put into place your long-term 3-year strategy, right? And track the progress over time, over weeks, over months, over quarters, and over years, and to ensure that the work that you're doing, the goals that you have in place, are we still lining up with these long-term goals that we have? And we know that times are changing very rapidly. Something you put in place today may not be exactly what makes sense in 3 years. Technology is changing. The political landscape is changing. Financial, situations are changing. But again, having a tool that allows you to edit and have this more fluid motion of what are our big themes of what we're trying to accomplish and change the actions and plans on how we get there is really helpful. And putting that into a platform that has full visibility, throughout your organization, and then reassigning different pieces of that action plan to people helps you stay aligned on these long-term visions of that 3-year strategic plan.
I like building on that too, Lindsay. I love what you're saying there. I think when you get into the space of the 3-year to 5-year plan, which I really love, I think that's a great horizon is the 3 to 5-year plan, because I think it's both accomplishable as well as refreshable. I think the challenge, and so for me, it's always about, every 5 years or so, I think we need to do a complete refresh on a plan. We're going to tear it down and start from scratch. Mission, vision, values stay the same, but we're going to get back into key focus areas and strategic objectives again, and down into initiatives and projects. Now, with that said, in those interim years, while you're accomplishing that 3-year plan, I don't think you should not have any movement in your key focus areas.
Right.
You should have very little movement in your strategic objectives. Maybe 1 or 2 need to be dealt with, but we can change out and remove and add in initiatives that next layer down in terms of
Exactly.
how we're accomplishing that strategic objective. So to me, it's like for 3 years, we're going to do, minor changes year over year. And I work with several that are just doing the minor changes year over year. I can do that with a group inside of a day. So that doesn't take too long. But then every 5 years or so, whatever is appropriate for your community, we really do need to do the complete refresh and just make sure we're completely aligned again. Not mission, vision, values typically, but just on key focus areas, strategic objectives, and make sure we're kind of rebuilding it. So, yeah, what Lindsay's talking about is how do we track it and how do we know we're successful in that 3 years? But again, we're looking for iterative stuff in 3-year horizon, not massive overhauls. And then the other thing is making sure that we're reporting out and doing progress reports back to our elected bodies. How are we coming along, and owning that candidly? Here's where we're succeeding. Here's where we're failing. Here's where we need more support from you. And that way we're
Yeah.
making sure that we're showing that.
Yeah, exactly. Get those big picture items for your plan in place, and then make sure as resources and things change, you're flexible on the action plan and have the ability to communicate that and track it easily. It's really important. So this one's back to you, Nick. How do we gain consent during strategic planning? Any tips?
Yes. So one of the tools I have a couple tools that I use. One is definitely introduce that concept of informed consent at the start so that everybody knows what you're after, and then continue to use the phrase. I want to remind everybody as we go through this that what we're asking you to do is, if you have a significant objection, please raise it. If you have no significant objection, then we're asking you to go ahead and be okay with where the team is going, the larger team. When I get into a process like that, sometimes you have a difficult elected leader or a difficult staff member, or you got a difficult somebody who wants to do that. I actually bring buzzers along. So I have buzzers that I give everybody so that you can have a specific objection if you want it. So if you want it, you have 3 minutes to build your case. So you can buzz, you get to use it once. It's like turning your chair around on the voice. You slap that buzzer,
Mhm.
that's your one use of the buzzer. You get to have your voice heard for 3 minutes. You get to make your case to others and see if you can convince others over to your point of view. So that means that even if it doesn't have like the support of the whole, you still have the chance to have your voice heard on a topic that maybe everybody else has moved on. And what I find is that out of like, let's say a 7-person council or a 7-person commission, everybody will do that once throughout the course of the day or the 2 days. Um, Typically, once or twice, people will come around. And then if we need to, we do a vote. And we say, okay, majority rules, just like it does in life, tyranny of the majority, not tyranny of the minority. So we're going to go ahead and say that if you don't have the votes, you don't have the votes. It doesn't make the plan. And as long as people know that they have the opportunity to object, even if they're the sole objection, and that they have the opportunity to be heard, they couldn't get the votes. So we have to move on, and we really appreciate you having that input. Only once or twice have I had folks that are a little cantankerous beyond that point. One of the other things I do in terms of gaining consent is if I know I'm dealing with a difficult group, I will actually lay out ground rules for the group on a board and have them sign it. So I'll
Mhm.
actually have elected officials sign this. This is what you agreed to allow me to do as the facilitator, which is keep the conversation moving. So I have a set of ground rules that I use that they sign off on. Um, that way they know how I'm supposed to show up. That way, if I do have anybody being disrespectful or delaying what we're doing, then I handle that with, you agreed to these, and my job as the facilitator is to continue to move us forward. And that way I can deal with it, and it's not a senior staff member trying to rein in an elected official or some variation on that. So the buzzer is a great technique.
I like the buzzer too. You've got some good tips and tricks, Nick, in your
In
bag
my
of
Santa sack? Yeah.
yes, in your Santa sack. Thank you. Okay, and this one goes back to one of your examples that you used earlier. How can we effectively balance the emphasis on public safety and economic development?
Read the last part of that. Balance public safety and economic
Balance the
development.
emphasis on public safety and economic development.
I'm not sure in the context of this question whether the question is that there might be too much focus on economic development and public safety or whether they're counterbalancing forces. Um, so
Attendee, if you'd like to add some additional context, that might help us, but we want to circle back to it.
yeah, let's circle back to that. I'd love to
Circle
be able
back.
to answer the question.
Yep.
But want to make sure I understand, is the goal to counterbalance or is the goal to talk about how they should be prioritized?
Okay. Come back to that one. And then what measures can we take to build and maintain trust in the community through strategic planning?
Great question. Love that question. The fact is, you need to make friends in your community before you need them. So this is about the dog and pony show. This is about going out into the community when you don't need anything from the community and rolling out that plan and making sure people know. The other thing is, this is one of the things we're terrible at in the government space in general, which is we use terms that nobody understands. And you need to know this. The Chapman University Study on American Fears has noted this. Corruption of government is the #1 fear in America 6 out of the last 7 years. So recognize that when we go to the public, we are dealing with the #1 fear in America just to do our jobs. That means it's incredibly difficult for us to make the public informed and aware. It's also incredibly important for us to do our jobs well. So if we want this to be trust building, we have to act like that. I like things like infographics that help keep it really simple so that the public can consume the information, but we got to become better salespeople. What I find is we say things in government like, well, we're going to install riprap along the riparian corridor in order to reduce the turbidity of the water. What on earth did I just say? I said I'm going to put big rocks in the river to make the water clean, but that's not what we say to the public. So we end up intimidating them through no fault of their own. And given the fact that they already have a starting condition of mistrust of government, then we need to recognize that clarity is critically important, and it's so powerful when it comes to actually seeing what is in the plan. So I'm big on, if you need to get a marketing firm to go ahead and really pretty up your plan before you roll it out, do that. Infographics are a really powerful way to create consumable information that the public can understand. So those might be some good ways to do it. And also get out there and do that dog and pony show in your community. Go to the Rotary Club, go to the downtown business district, go to your economic development corporation, go to schools and the principals if you need to, superintendents. Get key stakeholders understanding what's in your plan, and take the time to do that when you need nothing from them. And at that moment, you're starting to build that relationship and starting to build that trust. Just know that the first couple times you do it, people won't always love it. Go do it anyways. And the more you come back, the more that resistance fades, the more buy-in you have the next time around, and the more understanding you have of what the community is after. So that'd be my take on it.
Yeah, I think that's great. And coming back to our previous question real quick. So counterbalancing. So read it again. How can we effectively counterbalance the emphasis on public safety and economic development?
Yeah, it's a trick. I've actually been in communities where public safety is low on the list of priorities because the community is so safe. Whereas I've never seen economic development not be a top list priority. So I would just argue that out of the gate, economic development is almost always going to be a priority in your strategic plan, no matter what you do. So I see public safety having varying levels of sort of importance to that. They are always in municipal budgets, generally speaking, county budgets, the sheriff's budget, the police budget, the fire budget. These are huge budgets. They are typically 40 to 60% of the overall budget. So just recognize they are a massive part of that. But you can't have economic development when you have an unsafe community. So public safety's prioritization becomes a precursor to effective economic development. And many of the other things that we want to be able to do rely on those two factors. When we talk a vibrant downtown, well, economic development's necessary for that. So that's why that forced prioritization discussion becomes so important, because we may list economic development as a priority, and we may list public safety as a priority. When they stack up against each other in that forced prioritization I was showing you, how do they actually weigh out against each other? And that really varies substantially from community to community. What I will say is they're both still always on the strategic plan. So you're not going to get them out of there. I think maybe the follow-up question would be, how can you create greater emphasis on some of the other items in your strategic plan? So it's not maybe just about maybe deprioritizing or counterbalancing those, but that forced prioritization, that mirror held up, is a really important part. The other catch with economic development issues is that the funding has to be there to do it. So there's this sort of backdoor section of the strategic planning process. We've got this great vision for a complete revitalization of all elements of our downtown. Well, great. All we need is $300 billion to do that. Do we have that? Well, no, we don't. So let's recognize that that is not a realistic goal for us to accomplish. And that's the type of conversation that we want to lend as we go through that. So I find that conversation is the best way for us to understand that and to stack them up against other priorities. In that one that I listed, you saw affordable housing at the top of that list. Economic development was where that affordable housing goal went, but also under that was community broadband. So here's this thing that was at the bottom of the list, but from an economic development standpoint, affordable housing was at the top of the list, and public safety was somewhere in the middle. Well, let's have that discussion. Let's talk about whether this actually makes sense to us. I would be happy to, whomever is asking that question, if you want to hit me up offline, I'd be happy to go ahead and chat with you about your specific situation and talk through how we could be effective there. But it's a great question and a loaded question for sure. Just know that those will make the plan, and they are oftentimes the area of a lot of focus.
Yeah, no, thanks, Nick. Two more, and then I know we're starting to run out on time. So if anyone does have any additional questions and we don't have time to get to them, please feel free to continue adding them to the Q&A. And if we don't have time during the session, we'll definitely make sure we get you an answer. But second to last, how can governments encourage inclusivity through citizen engagement?
Great question. So first of all, let's scrap the traditional nonsense for a second, and let me just speak plain to you for a second. It is hard to reach marginalized or underrepresented populations straight up. So we've got to do some really different kinds of things in order to be able to do that. Why I like community surveys is many of the folks that do community surveys have active mechanisms of reaching out to underserved populations, and that might be making sure that we have the form in Spanish as an example, or any other sort of population set that might be underserved by just having it in English. Another technique I like is I'm a big fan of focus groups. For example, in Australia and the UK, it is required to have deliberative engagement, is what it's called. You cannot have a strategic plan or a comprehensive plan without deliberative engagement. And one of the things in the tools and techniques they do is they do paid focus groups, which I love as a concept. So they pay folks so that they can actually take off work to be able to come participate. The folks get educated in what's actually happening in the community. So staff will work with them to help them understand the nuances of this stuff. Because let's face it, the public isn't actively monitoring what's happening in their local government. They just know that when something affects them, they have a really strong opinion and very little information. So we have to solve that, which is getting them informed. So I like focus groups because you can, if you want to pay people, I think that's a great way to go ahead and make sure you have time and attention, and then get them to weigh in on meaty topics or important topics that you need. If you don't want to pay them, you can still get focus groups, but I would do that with key stakeholders in the community. That might be high school students, your business community, people who do events in your community, those kinds of residents of active and lesser active neighborhoods. One of the tools that I used to use when I would do this in one of the communities that I worked with was I would go gorilla chalk the neighborhood like 3 or 4 days before and say, meet here at 8 a.m. on Saturday for free donuts. And basically, I'd put it on the sidewalks and go to an area that I would call as underrepresented, and then show up there with donuts and be like, "Hey, I'd like to talk to you about this plan, how we're doing it, and we'd love to have your input. Please provide that input," and then give them the opportunity to provide input on the spot that would allow me to capture that. Because if we just put it out there through traditional methods, you're not going to get those populations. So try some atraditional methods. Gorilla chalk in a neighborhood, or those kinds of things, I think are a great mechanism. Focus groups, another great mechanism.
Donuts would get me. That would get me to come. So
Yes, or
another
hot chocolate
another
this
great
time
one.
of year, right?
Or hot chocolate. Yeah, exactly. All right. And final question is a great one. How can we use data to streamline accountability and trust in communities?
Ooh, I wish that's how it worked.
Mhm.
One, I'd say if you don't have the data, you're correctly identifying something. If you don't have the data, you have a real problem on your hands. And I work with communities that are in that position, and they have a real problem on their hands. So one is the fact that you're asking the question says to me you're tracking the data. How do we use data to build trust? Well, this is where clarity comes in, not transparency. Transparency is putting all the data out there for the public to consume. Clarity is doing it in a way that the public can actually interpret for themselves what is occurring. And that's part of it, is we need to allow, in order to build trust, we need for people to be able to know for themselves that something is true without us being the only gatekeepers for that information, which is not always the easiest to do. But as I said, when we get out in the community and start showing people the plan and talking about what we're doing in the plan and how we're addressing things in the plan, we're doing that proactive community engagement that allows us to start building that trust. If we continue with a cadence of responsibility, we're coming back to the public, we're coming back to the Rotary Club and the downtown business group. We'd like to report out to you on where we are with the plan, what we're not doing well, what we are doing well. And being willing to say that to the public, I find, and doing it in a way that is clear and accountable, starts to rebuild or build that trust in the first place. So, for my mind, one is, do you have the data? If you don't, start today with getting data. Two is, do you have a tool to help you roll up or visualize that data? That's where Profit can help you. Is can we get that stuff as it's being reported rolled up to a level that we can do something with it? And then the question becomes, how do we visualize it or market that data? And again, infographics, dashboards, those types of things are great tools. But I believe in active participation in the community and rolling that out so that we're getting that message out to key groups. That way they can help build that trust because they have tendrils that we don't have. And they're willing to advocate and talk about what we're doing if we arm them with the information. So to me, it's have the data, make sure the data is usable, make sure it's interpretable, and we build clarity around it, and then going out and actively showing people the data and not hiding it, but putting it out there on Front Street and saying, here's what we're doing well, and here's what we're not doing well. And you have to own both. If you own both, that's building trust. If you only talk about what you're doing well, the public won't trust you.
Yeah, and on that, well, first of all, this has been very insightful. So thank you, Nick. You've done an incredible job of outlining, what it takes to build a strong strategic plan. So we appreciate your time and your wealth of knowledge. And just to close this out real quick, I'm going to come back to that piece actually as well, the transparency and clarity, and how do we build trust in the communities. At Profit, we understand that not just strategy, but execution. These things are dependent on each other, right? So you do all this work to build a strong strategic plan, but without the execution side of it, it's essentially useless, right? We want to make sure that we're executing on these strategic plans that you're building. And that's where we come in. So once you've done all this hard work, you've untangled the light, you've trimmed your tree, and all the things that are needed to build that incredible strategic plan, we want to give you the tools to operationalize that plan, align your people, and then track performance, essentially. We do this through a multitude of tools, goal alignment, task and project management, meeting facilitators, surveys, as Nick mentioned. But we also don't want all this hard work that you're doing to go unnoticed. That's where some of that clarity, transparency, like how do we build trust in the community comes in. So we have interactive public dashboards that allow you to keep your residents up to date on, the initiatives and the progress that's happening. And this is updates real time. We have integrations that make this a really low effort way to keep your residents up to date. And that's a really great way to start building that trust. Say like, hey, here's your tax dollars at work. Here's what we've committed to you as a community. And here's how we're doing. Some of it may not always look pretty, as Nick mentioned, but it's a great way to build trust and be honest and, show them the work that you're putting in place. And I know we're at time. So with that being said, if you are interested in learning more about Profit can help you with your strategic plan, especially if you've already maybe started that process, in the chat, there's a link to try it out for 30 days. And then, if you're still in the beginning stages and want to talk about what does a strategic plan look like? How do we get our team, our organization on board with that? Feel free to reach out to us for a consultation. Profit and Sustainovation are both committed to being a strategic partner to the government space. And, we're really looking forward to having you on the next session. So thanks all and happy holidays.
Thanks, everyone. Happy holidays. Thanks for the gift of your time.